The colony had been cut off for decades. No reinforcements. No contact. No hope. Yet when outsiders finally arrived, the humans were alive. And something far worse than war had died trying to reach them. The survey vessel Arden Reach dropped from transit at the edge of the uncharted system with routine precision. Its mission was simple on paper. Confirm the status of a lost human settlement established 42 standard cycles earlier. No signals had ever returned from the colony. No ships had departed. The system had been written off as another quiet failure of expansion. Commander Thalen expected silence when the stars stabilized around the ship. Instead, long-range sensors detected controlled energy signatures on the fourth planet. Artificial grids. Power distribution. Atmospheric regulation. The colony still lived. Relief spread through the bridge crew, but it lasted only seconds. Secondary scans revealed irregular formations across the planetary surface. Massive structures surrounded the settlement in uneven clusters. At first they appeared geological. Then the imaging refined. They were not structures. They were remains. The first visual feed resolved slowly across the central display. The planet's surface stretched outward in pale desert bands and fractured basalt plains. At the center of a wide basin stood the human colony, compact, ordered, intact. And beyond its perimeter lay shapes so large they distorted the landscape around them. Commander Thalen leaned forward. Enhance the outer field. Magnification deepened. The shapes resolved into forms that had once been alive. Carapaces the size of towers. Segmented limbs buried halfway into the soil. Skeletal frames twisted as if frozen mid-attack. Hundreds of them. Perhaps thousands. Every direction the sensors reached revealed more. The bridge fell silent. "These are not local fauna," whispered Science Officer Vell. "Mass signatures indicate off-world biology. Multiple species. Predatory morphology. 'Cause of death?" Thalen asked. "No uniform pattern. Structural collapse. Internal rupture. Neural overload in several specimens. No visible heavy weapon impact." The statement settled over the crew like pressure. Something had killed creatures capable of surviving atmospheric entry and planetary assault. And whatever it was had done so repeatedly. Thalen ordered orbital descent. Protocol demanded confirmation of survivors. Yet, as the Arden Reach entered the planet's atmosphere, the external cameras transmitted images that stripped away any remaining sense of routine. The colony's outer boundary was not a wall. It was a line drawn by history. The ground itself marked where attacks had broken and ended. Beyond that invisible threshold, the terrain changed from undisturbed Earth to a vast field of collapsed giants. Landing thrusters ignited over a cleared zone just outside the settlement perimeter. No defensive fire met the descending vessel. No warning signals pulsed across communication bands. The colony simply observed. When the ramp opened, a group of humans waited on the other side. They wore simple environmental suits, unadorned and functional. Their posture was calm. Their expressions were composed in a way that unsettled even experienced explorers. These were not survivors rescued from hardship. They were inhabitants accustomed to enduring it. A woman stepped forward as Commander Thalen approached. Her hair was bound tightly at the back of her head. Fine dust marked the edges of her suit. She carried no visible weapon. "Welcome to Haven Colony," she said evenly. "We detected your arrival." Thalen inclined his head. "Commander Thalen of the survey vessel Arden Reach. We are here to assess your status and provide assistance." Her gaze shifted briefly past him, toward the distant horizon where immense carcasses lay scattered across the basin. "We are stable. Assistance is not required." Thalen followed her line of sight. From ground level, The scale of the remains was overwhelming. The nearest corpse loomed like a collapsed fortress. Its segmented plating bore deep fractures, not from explosive force, but from internal stress. The air carried no stench of decay. The bodies had long since hardened into silent monuments. "What happened here?" Dallin asked quietly. The woman considered the question as if measuring how much to reveal. They came in waves. Different species. No coordination. Pure predation. They detected human biosignatures and converged. "And your defenses?" Vel asked, stepping forward. "Orbital weapons? Autonomous systems?" The woman shook her head once. "We had none that would stop them." The answer created more questions than it resolved. Dallin studied the field again. The number of dead suggested prolonged conflict. Yet the colony structures behind him showed minimal damage. Power grids functioned. Atmospheric processors operated at full efficiency. Life here had not merely survived. It had continued. "You endured repeated assaults without external support," Dallin said slowly. "And you defeated every threat." The woman met his gaze without pride or emphasis. "We endured." A tremor of unease passed through the survey team. Endurance alone did not account for what surrounded them. The evidence suggested something more deliberate, more controlled than desperate survival. Dallin gestured toward the basin. "We request permission to examine the field. Scientific analysis may help determine why so many species converged here." The woman's expression did not change, but her response came after a measured pause. "You may observe. Do not cross the inner markers without guidance." She turned and began walking toward the settlement entrance. The humans who had accompanied her followed without comment. The survey team hesitated before moving after them, each step accompanied by the silent presence of enormous remains pressing against the horizon. As they approached the colony structures, Dallin noticed something else. The ground between buildings bore faint geometric patterns etched into the surface. Not defensive trenches, not fortifications. Patterns of alignment, precise, intentional, repeated. He crouched briefly to examine one marking. The soil within its boundaries had fused into hardened glass. No explosive residue. No thermal scarring beyond controlled limits. Vel spoke softly behind him. "Commander, the energy signatures here are consistent with directed resonance, not conventional weapon discharge." Dallin straightened slowly. The explanation did not reassure him. It deepened the mystery. Inside the colony perimeter, life proceeded with steady rhythm. Agricultural systems operated under transparent shielding. Maintenance drones moved along defined routes. Children crossed a central walkway under supervision. There was no visible fear. Only practiced awareness. The woman who had greeted them stopped at the edge of a wide plaza. From this vantage point, the entire basin spread outward beyond the colony boundary. The graveyard of massive forms encircled them like a horizon of silence. "You came expecting survivors," she said. "You found a record." Dallin watched a distant shape settle as shifting sand finally claimed part of its exposed structure. "A record of what?" Her answer came without hesitation. "A record of everything that tried to end us." The wind moved across the basin, lifting fine dust that traced invisible lines between the colony and the fallen giants beyond it. Commander Dallin realized with growing certainty that the most important question was not how the monsters had died. It was why they had all come here, and why none of them had ever left. Commander Dallin requested a full perimeter survey before entering deeper into the colony. The request was not denied, but it was carefully controlled. A human escort unit accompanied the survey team beyond the central plaza, guiding them along marked routes that curved subtly across the terrain. The path did not take the shortest distance between points. It followed patterns that seemed deliberate, almost ritualistic. though every step served a practical purpose. Up close, the remains beyond the colony revealed disturbing complexity. The creatures had not died randomly. Their positions formed layered arcs around the settlement, each ring marking a previous approach. Some had collapsed mid-stride, massive limbs frozen in forward motion. Others lay twisted as if their internal structure had failed instantly. No consistent weapon damage appeared across the remains. Instead, structural breakdowns seemed to originate from within. Science Officer Vell scanned the nearest specimen, a towering quadrupedal form with dense external plating. The instrument readings fluctuated before stabilizing. Residual energy signatures are still present, Vell reported quietly. Not radiation, not thermal residue. It is structural resonance, embedded into the material itself. Thalen examined the fractured plating more closely. Fine patterns spread across the surface like veins of hardened light, extending from the core outward. The damage had not been inflicted from outside force. Something had disrupted the creature's internal balance until it destroyed itself. How long have these remains been here? Thalen asked their escort. The human guide, a broad-shouldered man named Corin, considered the horizon before answering. Some arrived in the first years. Others came later. The waves slowed after cycle 30. None have approached in the last 5 cycles. Why did they stop? Vell asked. Corin's expression remained neutral. Because the outcome never changed. The statement carried no pride. It sounded like a measured fact, repeated often enough to become routine. The survey continued toward a region where the ground bore heavier fusion patterns. Here, the soil had vitrified into dark, glass-like planes arranged in geometric bands. The formations were too precise to be accidental. They formed interlocking grids that extended beneath layers of sand, only partially visible at the surface. These are not defensive trenches, Vell said. They are field anchors. Something here stabilized energy propagation across the surface. Thalen followed the lines outward until they disappeared beneath the outer ring of remains. A containment structure, he murmured. Or a channel. Corin did not correct him. A boundary, he said simply. They reached a point where the air itself felt subtly different. Not heavier, but more ordered, as if the environment maintained a constant equilibrium regardless of shifting winds. The instruments confirmed a steady distribution of energy across the region, uniform and self-correcting. No fluctuations exceeded minimal thresholds. Vell spoke in a lower tone. Commander, the environment is regulating itself. Whatever system produced this effect is still active. Thalen looked back toward the colony. From this vantage, the settlement appeared small against the vast basin, yet everything beyond its perimeter had fallen while it remained untouched. The evidence suggested not a single decisive defense, but a persistent field of controlled influence. As they returned toward the inner markers, a distant vibration passed through the ground. It was not an impact. It was a resonance, brief and precise, like a pulse that confirmed stability before fading. None of the humans reacted. The survey team exchanged uneasy glances. Inside the colony, Thalen requested a formal briefing with the governing council. The request was granted without delay. The meeting chamber reflected the same design philosophy as the outer terrain. Minimal ornamentation. Structured alignment. Every element served a defined function. The council consisted of 5 human representatives, including the woman who had first greeted them. She introduced herself as Director Alina Reyes, current coordinator of Haven Colony. Her voice carried steady authority without force. "You have seen the perimeter," Reyes said. "You understand the scale of what approached." "We do not understand how it was stopped," Thalen replied. Reyes inclined her head slightly. "Then we will explain what we can." A projection activated above the chamber floor, displaying a simplified model of the system. The colony appeared at the center, surrounded by concentric fields that expanded outward across the basin. The representation showed no weapons, no fortifications. Instead, it illustrated dynamic equilibrium zones shifting in response to external disturbance. When the first predators arrived, conventional defenses failed, Reyes began. We lacked the resources to destroy them directly. We observed their behavior and identified a common vulnerability. Every organism relies on internal balance to function. Movement, metabolism, neural signaling all depend on stable patterns. We learned to disrupt those patterns without direct force. Val studied the projection carefully. You induced structural instability within the organisms. We induced imbalance, Reyes corrected, not destruction. The organisms collapsed under their own processes. Thalen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the controlled climate of the chamber. You weaponized environmental coherence. Reyes met his gaze without hesitation. We stabilized ourselves. The rest followed naturally. The explanation was precise yet incomplete. It described method but not origin. How did you develop this capability without external support? Thalen asked. Reyes allowed a brief silence before answering. Isolation forced adaptation. We studied resonance phenomena within the planet's crust and atmosphere. The environment itself became our medium. Once established, the system required only maintenance, not escalation. The projection shifted to show successive waves of approaching organisms. Each entered the field. Each destabilized. Each collapsed at a measurable distance from the colony boundary. The pattern repeated with relentless consistency. Why did so many species converge here? Vel asked. Predation alone does not explain coordinated arrival from multiple regions. Reyes deactivated the projection. We believe the first waves emitted distress signals during collapse. Those signals attracted others. Each arrival reinforced the pattern. A graveyard that called to predators, Thalen realized. A cycle of approach and failure recorded across decades. You turned this world into a filter, he said quietly. Reyes did not deny it. We survived. The council chamber remained still. Outside, life continued with quiet efficiency. Children crossed the plaza under careful observation. Maintenance drones adjusted structural alignments. No signs of panic or urgency appeared anywhere within the settlement. Thalen understood then that the colony had not merely defended itself. It had endured long enough to transform survival into a system. The monsters had not fallen because humans hunted them. They had fallen because they could not remain stable in the presence of what humans had built. As the meeting concluded, Reyes offered a final statement that carried the weight of lived certainty. We did not seek to become a barrier, she said. But once the pattern emerged, we maintained it. Not only for ourselves, for anything beyond this system. Thalen left the chamber with a growing realization that the colony's existence had altered more than its own fate. It had quietly protected regions of space that would never know the danger that once moved toward them. The graveyard beyond the colony was not only a record of survival. It was evidence of a boundary the galaxy had never seen and might never fully understand. Commander Thalen spent the next cycle reviewing every data set the colony agreed to share. Patterns emerged quickly. The human system did not rely on overwhelming power. It relied on precision sustained over time. The colony had mapped the planet's natural resonance layers and aligned its infrastructure to reinforce them. Buildings, power grids, and even agricultural systems were positioned to maintain equilibrium across a wide area. The effect extended beyond the settlement, shaping the basin itself into a stable zone hostile to uncontrolled biological systems. Science Officer Vel compared energy signatures from the field anchors with the internal structures of the fallen organisms. The correlation was exact. Each creature had entered the boundary carrying immense biological force, but that force depended on internal synchronization. The colony's field disrupted that synchronization at a foundational level. Muscular impulses lost coordination. Neural pathways misfired. Structural stress accumulated faster than organic repair could compensate. Collapse followed inevitably. It is not a weapon in the traditional sense, Vel explained during the briefing. It is an environment that refuses imbalance. Any organism that cannot regulate itself within that environment fails. Thalen considered the implication carefully. Then, adaptation should have occurred. Predatory species learn. Vel nodded. Some attempted it. We identified structural modifications in later arrivals. Reinforced neural shielding. Distributed metabolic nodes. They survived longer within the boundary, but ultimately destabilized as well. The conclusion was chilling in its simplicity. Evolution itself had tried to overcome the colony's defense. Evolution had failed. Later that cycle, Director Reyes granted the survey team access to a monitoring tower positioned at the basin's highest elevation. From there, the scale of the graveyard became unmistakable. Rings of fallen organisms extended far beyond the visible horizon, each layer marking another era of attack. Some remains had eroded into the landscape. Others still retained sharp structural integrity, preserved by the same environmental stability that had destroyed them. Reyes stood beside Thalen as the wind moved across the basin in controlled currents shaped by terrain alignment. "You asked why they came," she said quietly. "Predation explains the beginning. Pattern recognition explains the rest." Every collapse produced energy signatures that spread through subspace. Predators detect opportunity through weakness. They interpreted the signals as proof of prey concentration, and they continued to arrive even as they died, Thalen said. "Yes," Reyes replied. The system fed on the expectation of success. Thalen watched a distant ridge where skeletal forms lay partially buried beneath layered sediment. "You realized what was happening and maintained the pattern intentionally." Reyes did not look away from the horizon. "Once we understood the effect, stopping it would have invited pursuit beyond this system. We chose containment." Containment. The word carried enormous weight. Haven Colony had become more than a settlement. It had become a fixed point that absorbed threats which might otherwise have spread across inhabited space. The survey team's instruments detected faint, residual signals beneath the basin's surface. Vel traced them to a network of deep geological anchors embedded along tectonic fault lines. The anchors did not generate energy. They stabilized existing planetary oscillations, aligning them into coherent patterns that extended upward through the crust and atmosphere. "The planet itself participates in the defense," Vel concluded. "They transform natural resonance into a persistent field." That evening, Thalen requested permission to examine the earliest impact zone, where the first wave of organisms had fallen decades earlier. Reyes agreed, but required strict adherence to guided routes. The path descended into a depression where the ground bore the oldest fusion patterns. Here, the glass-like surface formed continuous sheets fractured by time, yet still intact. At the center of the depression lay a structure unlike any other remains. It was smaller than the giants that surrounded it, but its design suggested complexity rather than brute force. Segmented plates overlapped in layered geometry. Its central core had collapsed inward, leaving a hollow cavity where internal systems had once operated. Vel scanned the structure and spoke with controlled urgency. This organism possessed distributed cognition. Multiple neural centers coordinated through resonance coupling. It should have resisted localized disruption. Thalen studied the inward collapse. Yet it failed. Reyes approached the structure with measured steps. "This was the first to reach the inner boundary," she said. "Its stability exceeded previous arrivals." It forced us to refine the system. After this collapse, no organism advanced further. The implications settled heavily across the team. The colony had learned from each encounter. Adaptation had not been one-sided. Humanity had evolved its defense through observation and persistence. On their return, Thalen noticed a subtle shift in environmental readings. The field remained stable, yet its parameters adjusted slightly as atmospheric conditions changed. The system did not remain static. It adapted continuously to maintain equilibrium. That night, the survey vessel transmitted a preliminary report to Interstellar Command. The message described a functioning human colony, self-sustained and secure. It also described a phenomenon unlike any known defense system, an environment engineered to reject uncontrolled force. The report ended with a recommendation that no attempt be made to dismantle or interfere with the colony's containment field without comprehensive understanding. Before rest cycle, Thalen met Reyes once more in the observation chamber overlooking the basin. The stars above Haven Colony shone with quiet clarity, untouched by the history written across the ground below. "You protected more than your own people," Thalen said. "You protected regions of space that never knew they were threatened." Reyes folded her hands behind her back. "We protected balance where we could maintain it." Thalen hesitated before asking the question that had grown steadily since arrival. What happens if the pattern changes? If something arrives that does not depend on internal equilibrium? Reyes turned toward him slowly. "Then we adapt again." Her answer carried no uncertainty. It was not confidence born of superiority. It was the calm of a civilization that had endured long enough to trust its capacity to learn under pressure. Beyond the colony boundary, the graveyard remained still, a silent testament to decades of relentless approach and inevitable collapse. Commander Thalen realized that Haven Colony had not merely survived isolation. It had become a line that nothing driven by uncontrolled force had ever crossed, and the galaxy had never known that line existed. The fourth cycle began with a change so subtle that the colony's instruments detected it before any observer noticed a difference in the sky. A faint disturbance appeared at the outermost edge of the system. It was not a vessel. It was not a biological mass. It was a region where space itself carried irregular tension, as if something enormous moved without form or boundary. Commander Thalen stood with Director Reyes and Science Officer Vel in the monitoring chamber as layered sensor data resolved into a coherent projection. The disturbance did not accelerate toward the planet. It unfolded gradually, expanding like a slow ripple across still water. "It does not match previous patterns," Vel said quietly. "No metabolic signature, no structural framework. It is not an organism in any traditional sense." Reyes observed the projection with focused calm. "It is responding to the field." The colony's resonance anchors adjusted automatically. Surface alignments shifted by microscopic degrees. Atmospheric oscillations redistributed across the basin. The system was not reacting with force. It was preparing to maintain equilibrium against an unfamiliar influence. Thalen felt a tension that had nothing to do with physical danger. "If it has no internal structure, your method may not apply." Reyes nodded once. "Then we learn its behavior." The disturbance continued its slow approach. Unlike the creatures that had descended in violent waves, this presence exhibited no urgency. It advanced with measured persistence, unaffected by gravitational variations or energy gradients that had once guided predators toward the colony. Its motion resembled observation rather than attack. Within hours, faint fluctuations appeared across the outer rings of the graveyard. Not movement of the remains, but changes in residual energy patterns embedded within them. The disturbance interacted indirectly, amplifying dormant signals that had persisted for decades. Vel examined the data with growing intensity. It is reading the history recorded in the field. It is mapping every collapse, every resonance pattern. It is learning from the graveyard itself. Reyes issued a quiet directive across the colony network. All non-essential activity ceased. Systems dedicated additional capacity to monitoring and adaptive alignment. Haven Colony did not mobilize for battle. It focused on coherence. The disturbance reached the system's inner boundary after several standard hours. At that moment, every sensor registered the same phenomenon. The region of irregular tension encountered the outermost layer of stabilized space shaped by the Y's colony's long-maintained field. Nothing exploded. Nothing shattered. Instead, the disturbance slowed down. The projection displayed a gradual deceleration, as if the presence encountered resistance not from force but from consistency. It attempted to expand. The field maintained equilibrium. The two influences met without collision, each defining a boundary the other could not easily cross. Thalen watched in silence as the interaction unfolded. It is testing the boundary. Reyes did not look away from the data stream. Everything that arrived here tested the boundary. Val adjusted the sensor filters, isolating minute variations within the disturbance. There is internal organization forming, Val reported. Not biological. Patterned energy clusters. It is generating structure in response to environmental stability. The implication was immediate. This presence did not bring internal equilibrium with it. It constructed equilibrium as needed. The colony's anchors intensified alignment across the basin. Subsurface resonance layers synchronized with atmospheric oscillations. The environment did not push outward. It deepened its coherence, reinforcing the conditions that had dismantled countless attackers before. For a long moment that stretched across the monitoring chamber, neither influence advanced. The disturbance reshaped itself at the boundary, probing for imbalance. The colony maintained uniform stability across every measurable parameter dot. Then a change occurred within the disturbance. A segment detached from the larger field and moved forward. It crossed into the outer perimeter where earlier waves had collapsed. Sensors tracked its progress with precise clarity. The segment maintained structure longer than any previous arrival. It adapted continuously, adjusting internal patterns to match the environment it entered. It was learning in real time. Vel spoke with controlled urgency. It is compensating for disruption faster than the system can induce it. Reyes responded without hesitation. Increase harmonic integration across anchors 2 through 7. Narrow variance thresholds. Across the basin, deep resonance layers shifted fractionally. The environment did not become stronger. It became more exact thought. The advancing segment began to lose cohesion. Its internal clusters flickered, reorganizing repeatedly in an attempt to maintain function. It moved another measured distance inward before its structure fractured into. Dispersed energy that dissipated harmlessly across the stabilized field. Silence filled the chamber. The larger disturbance, beyond the boundary, did not retreat. It remained at the perimeter, absorbing the outcome. Then, slowly, its internal configuration altered. Patterns stabilized within it with greater precision than before. Thalen understood the implication immediately. It will try again. Reyes inclined her head. Yes. The interaction continued across multiple cycles. Each attempt sent a new segment into the field. Each segment advanced slightly farther than the last. Each collapse required the colony to refine its alignment. The contest did not resemble battle. It resembled study conducted under existential stakes. Haven Colony adapted without visible strain. Systems adjusted. Anchors recalibrated. Human operators monitored fluctuations with disciplined focus. There was no panic, only persistent attention. On the 7th cycle of contact, the disturbance altered its approach entirely. Instead of sending a fragment inward, it reduced its overall activity. The boundary stabilized. No further probes occurred. Sensors recorded a uniform configuration across the disturbance's structure, a state of equilibrium that matched the outermost layer of the colony's field without. Entering it, .vel analyzed the data repeatedly before speaking. It has achieved stable coexistence at the boundary. It no longer attempts penetration. Ray has allowed the smallest release of breath. Then it has learned the condition for persistence. Commander Thalen observed the motionless projection, aware that the moment represented more than a single system's survival. A presence that could not be destroyed by force had encountered a civilization that did not rely on force. The result was not victory through domination. It was stability enforced through unwavering coherence. As the disturbance remained at the boundary without further incursion, the graveyard beyond Haven Colony lay undisturbed beneath the steady stars. The field had not repelled the unknown. It had taught it the only state in which it could exist without collapse. For the first time since their arrival, Thalen felt that he understood the true nature of the colony's defense. It did not conquer what approached. It required that everything which entered learn balance, or cease to remain. The disturbance remained at the system's boundary for 12 continuous cycles without advancing. Its structure held a steady configuration, mirroring the outer layer of Haven Colony's stabilized field. The effect resembled coexistence rather than confrontation. For the first time since its arrival, the system's background readings returned to predictable baselines. Commander Thalen used the interval to assemble a comprehensive analysis. Every known predatory organism that had entered the basin relied on internal imbalance to generate force. Movement required asymmetry. Reaction required difference. The colony's field removed that difference, imposing uniform equilibrium until aggressive systems could no longer function. What had approached now was not driven by predation. It was driven by adaptation. Science Officer Vel mapped subtle exchanges between the boundary field and the external presence. Minute fluctuations passed between them like measured signals. No information was transmitted in conventional form, yet both influences adjusted in response to the other's stability. It was not communication. It was mutual calibration. Direct arrays authorized a limited expansion of observation arrays beyond the original perimeter. These devices did not project force or emit signals. They recorded coherence gradients at extreme precision. Human operators monitored every variation, prepared to alter anchor alignment if deviation exceeded defined thresholds. During the 13th cycle, a change occurred. The disturbance contracted slightly, reducing its volume without increasing density. The movement suggested conservation rather than retreat. Its outer boundary aligned more closely with the system's stable layer, reducing friction between the two influences. Vel compared sequential readings and spoke with restrained intensity. It is minimizing internal variance to maintain persistence. It has learned the condition required to exist near us. Ray has absorbed the statement in silence. If it maintains that condition, it will remain harmless. Thalen considered the implication carefully. If it cannot maintain it, collapse will follow. Rias inclined her head. As with everything else that arrived, the colony maintained its routine with disciplined normalcy. Agricultural systems operated under constant environmental alignment. Infrastructure continued minor adjustments to preserve resonance precision. Life did not pause because danger existed. It adapted because danger had become part of existence long ago. Yet beneath the visible calm, Haven Colony prepared for the possibility that adaptation would not remain passive. Deep anchors received incremental recalibration, expanding the basin's stable geometry by fractions of a degree. The adjustment did not push the boundary outward. It refined the interior so thoroughly that any intrusion would encounter immediate correction. On the 16th cycle, a fragment separated from the external presence once more. Unlike previous probes, this fragment did not attempt direct penetration. It formed at the boundary and remained there, stabilizing itself to match the field. It neither advanced nor withdrew. Val examined the configuration. It is testing sustained equilibrium rather than probing weakness. Reyes authorized a measured response. The colony's anchors synchronized with greater precision, creating a gradient that extended slightly beyond the basin's original limit. The fragment encountered a region where environmental stability increased progressively rather than abruptly. The fragment held its structure. For the first time, an external presence persisted within a controlled extension of the field without collapse. The outcome did not signify vulnerability. It demonstrated that stability could be shared if maintained. Thalen recognized the strategic significance. You are allowing coexistence under defined conditions. Reyes met his gaze evenly. We are allowing persistence that does not threaten balance. The fragment remained intact for several cycles before slowly dissipating into uniform energy that blended with the surrounding environment. No residue of aggression remained. No signal of distress propagated outward. The larger presence beyond the boundary responded by reducing activity further. Its internal patterns stabilized into a configuration nearly identical to the colony's outer field. Sensors recorded an unprecedented state, a former source of potential disruption maintaining equilibrium voluntarily. That night, Thalen walked the inner perimeter alone under controlled supervision. The basin lay silent beyond the settlement's lights, its vast expanse marked by the shapes of fallen giants. He considered the decades of endurance that had produced this moment. Haven Colony had not merely resisted destruction. It had imposed a condition that even the unknown had chosen to accept. When he returned to the monitoring chamber, Reyes stood watching the boundary projection with calm focus. "It is learned that force cannot exist here," she said softly. "Only balance can remain." Thalen studied the data one final time before transmitting an updated report to Interstellar Command. The message carried a conclusion both precise and unsettling. Haven Colony had transformed survival into a principle. Anything that approached the system would either align with that principle or cease to endure. Beyond the planet's atmosphere, the once threatening presence held its position without movement, stable and silent. The graveyard within the basin remained unchanged, a permanent record of what had failed to learn. And for the first time since the colony's isolation began, the system no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like a boundary the universe itself had acknowledged. The coexistence at the boundary held for many cycles, long enough for the phenomenon to become measurable rather than uncertain. Haven Colony's instruments recorded the external presence not as a threat but as a constant reference point. It neither advanced nor withdrew. It remained aligned. For the first time in the colony's history, something beyond the basin existed without collapse and without hostility. Commander Thalen finalized the extended analysis for Interstellar Command. The conclusion was clear. Haven Colony had not simply survived isolation. It had created a condition of existence that forced adaptation from anything that approached. Predators had failed. Unknown forces had learned. The system now represented a fixed region of enforced equilibrium, maintained not by overwhelming power, but by relentless precision. Science Officer Val continued long-range scans across surrounding sectors. Subspace noise patterns revealed a subtle but undeniable change. Regions beyond the system exhibited reduced predatory convergence. Signals that once indicated uncontrolled migration of aggressive organisms had diminished over time. The effect suggested that the colony's long-standing containment had influenced patterns far beyond its immediate reach. "It was never only this planet," Val said during a quiet briefing. "For decades, disturbances that might have spread outward ended here. The system became a sink for imbalance. Now the pattern is reversing. The surrounding sectors are stabilizing. Director Reyes listened without visible reaction, but her response carried quiet gravity. Then the boundary has extended beyond our location. The implication was profound. Haven Colony had not simply defended itself. Its persistence had altered the behavior of space around it. A principle enforced in one isolated basin had begun to shape the wider environment through time and repetition. Yet the external presence remained, a silent witness at the system's edge. On the 21st cycle of coexistence, it changed once more. Instead of maintaining static alignment, it initiated a gradual withdrawal. The movement was slow and deliberate, preserving equilibrium at every stage. It did not retreat in defeat. It departed in stability. Vel monitored the process with focused attention. It is not dispersing. It is maintaining coherence as it moves outward. The structure it formed here is preserved. Dylan watched the projection as the presence receded into distant space, leaving no trace of disturbance behind. It has learned balance and carried it away. Rhea stood beside him, her posture composed but reflective. Then the lesson does not remain confined to this system. The boundary field across the basin maintained perfect stability. No surge of activity followed the departure. The graveyard beyond the colony lay unchanged, its silent record undisturbed by the absence of new arrivals. For the first time since the early cycles of isolation, Haven Colony existed without immediate external pressure. The Colony Council convened with the survey team to determine the next course of action. Interstellar Command had already transmitted a directive acknowledging Haven Colony as a protected zone of strategic significance. No attempt would be made to modify or replicate the system without direct collaboration. The galaxy had recognized a truth it could not ignore. The colony's endurance had become a safeguard for more than its own survival. During the final council session, Commander Thalen addressed the human representatives with formal clarity. Your colony has demonstrated a form of defense that reshapes conflict without engaging it directly. You have not conquered your enemies. You have rendered aggression unsustainable. This principle will influence interstellar doctrine for generations. Reyes accepted the statement without pride. We did what isolation required. Nothing more. Thalen looked beyond the chamber's transparent wall toward the basin where countless forms lay motionless beneath the steady sky. You created a line that cannot be crossed by force. Reyes answered with quiet certainty. We created a condition that cannot be ignored. Preparations began for the ardent reach to depart. The survey team conducted final calibrations, ensuring that all observational data accurately represented the colony's state. Vel compiled a detailed record of resonance patterns, geological alignments, and adaptive protocols. The information would not be used to replicate the system without consent, but it would stand as evidence of what disciplined persistence could achieve. Before departure, Thalen requested one final walk along the inner boundary. Reyes accompanied him in silence. The basin stretched outward in vast stillness, its surface marked by the shapes of fallen threats that had arrived with certainty of victory and ended in absolute failure. Do you believe they will return? Thalen asked after a long interval. Reyes studied the horizon where sky met stone. Everything that depends on imbalance eventually encounters stability. When that happens, it either learns or ceases. If anything comes again, the condition remains the same. Thalen absorbed the simplicity of her words. The colony did not prepare for war. It prepared for persistence. As the survey vessel lifted from the surface, its ascent carried a final view of Haven Colony. The settlement stood quiet and ordered within a basin encircled by history. No defenses pointed outward. No weapons guarded its perimeter. The system required none. Its strength lay in the unwavering maintenance of balance. From orbit, The planet appeared unchanged from any other isolated world. Only those who had walked its surface understood the magnitude of what it represented. A human colony had endured without rescue. It had faced endless waves of destruction. And through discipline alone, it had transformed survival into a boundary that reshaped the behavior of the galaxy. Commander Thalen transmitted the closing line of his report as the Ardent Reach entered. Transit. Haven Colony is not a graveyard of monsters. It is proof that humanity does not merely survive the unknown. Humanity teaches the unknown how to exist. The stars closed around the departing vessel, leaving behind a silent basin where imbalance could not endure, and where the lesson of persistence would remain for as long as the colony chose to maintain it. The departure of the Ardent Reach did not mark an ending for Haven Colony. It marked a transition from isolation to recognition. For decades, the humans of the basin had endured without witness. Now the galaxy knew what existed on this quiet world, not a fortress, not a weapon system, but a condition that reshaped survival itself. Months passed in steady rhythm. The resonance field remained stable across the basin. Environmental anchors adjusted with microscopic precision as tectonic shifts moved slowly beneath the planet's crust. Agricultural systems continued their cycles. Children studied beneath transparent shielding that revealed the endless horizon of fallen threats. Life proceeded not in celebration, but in practiced continuity. Director Reyes oversaw incremental expansions of monitoring arrays beyond the original boundary. These were not extensions of the fence. They were instruments of understanding. The colony had learned long ago that awareness was the first requirement of persistence. Every fluctuation in environmental balance was recorded. Every adjustment refined the system's harmony. Interstellar Command maintained distant observation, but honored its commitment to non-interference. Reports circulated across allied sectors describing Haven Colony as a stabilizing presence rather than a strategic asset. Trade vessels began routing around the system by choice, not from fear, but from respect. No civilization sought to challenge a place where imbalance itself could not survive. Yet the most profound change unfolded beyond the colony's sky. Long-range observatories across multiple sectors recorded declining patterns of uncontrolled predatory migration. Regions once marked by erratic disturbances grew quieter over time. Scientists could not identify a direct causal link, yet the correlation persisted. Wherever instability once spread unchecked, it now diminished gradually, as if the lesson enforced within Haven Colony had propagated through the wider structure of space. Within the basin, the graveyard remained untouched. Wind shaped the sand around immense forms that had arrived with absolute confidence and ended in silent collapse. They no longer represented danger. They represented memory, a record of what force alone could never sustain. One evening, Reyes walked the inner boundary with Corin beside her. The sky burned with deep orange light as the planet's star descended beyond the distant ridge. The resonance field adjusted subtly to shifting temperature gradients, maintaining the same unwavering equilibrium that had defined the colony's existence. Do you ever think about what might have happened if rescue had arrived earlier? Corin asked quietly. Reyes considered the horizon before answering. Rescue would have saved lives, but it would not have created this. Corin nodded. Both understood the truth without elaboration. Isolation had forced humanity here to confront existence without expectation of aid. From that confrontation had emerged a principle stronger than any fleet. Years passed. Haven Colony did not expand beyond the basin. It did not seek influence. Its strength lay in remaining exactly what it had become, a place where persistence was maintained with absolute discipline. Visitors arrived rarely and only with permission. Those who came expecting advanced weaponry left with a different understanding of power. On the anniversary of first contact, a transmission arrived from Interstellar Command. It contained updated survey data from distant regions once marked by high predatory convergence. The analysis concluded that large-scale aggressive migrations had declined to historically low levels. No explanation could be confirmed. The report ended with a single observation: systems that endure without escalation alter the environment around them. Reyes archived the message without ceremony. The colony did not require validation. It required only continuity. At dusk, she stood alone at the observation platform overlooking the basin. The wind moved steadily across the silent field of fallen giants. Above, the stars emerged one by one in precise alignment. Haven Colony remained unchanged, calm, ordered, and unyielding in its maintenance of balance. Humanity had not conquered the unknown here. Humanity had refused to surrender to it. Through patience and adaptation, the colony had revealed a truth the galaxy could no longer ignore. Force collapses when it cannot sustain itself. Only balance endures. And in that quiet basin, humanity had drawn a line no monster had ever crossed. The lesson remained, written across the surface of a world that had once been forgotten and was now impossible to ignore. If this story stayed with you until the end, let me know what moment hit you the hardest. Drop a like if you enjoyed the journey, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe if you want more HFY stories where humanity stands its ground against the impossible.